And start the recording. Alrighty, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Rivera Hernandez, and I'm the coordinator for student clubs and organizations within Student Life and Leadership. And welcome to the new Club Advisor information session. So really the goal with this session is to, of course, give you some information on your advisor roles. I know a lot of you are probably new advisors or have been advising for a while. So this meeting will serve as a check-in just to see how these couple months into the semester has been going for your, for your specific roles as the advisor of your orgs. But then also I want to provide some information on what an advisor is, and also if you know of other faculty or staff members that would be interested in serving as advisors, we could definitely pass information along to them. So that is really the couple goals that we're hoping that we are able to get out of this session. So let me go ahead and go to the next screen here. And just to introduce the agenda today, I'm going to be sharing what a student organization advisor is, what are the advising responsibilities of this individual, as well as, what are the sort of the procedures and things to think about when it comes to helping the students manage their organization on campus. And then lastly, of course, if you know of any other, faculty or staff that would be or are interested in serving as a club advisor, I will provide some information on how to become one as well. And then, of course, there will be some time for questions and answers near the end of the presentation. I also will share that, we are recording this session, and I will share these slides with you all and the recording as well. That way you can definitely refer back to it if you have any questions later on or you want to pass this information along. Alrighty, so what is a student organization advisor? So it really does differ from organization to organization, but essentially the role or the student organization advisor is a faculty or staff member who provides guidance and mentorship to student leaders within a student organization. So you all really play a very important role in helping the students, manage their organization, also develop and sharpen those leadership skills. So you all really play a really big part in, having that happen within the organization. It's also, I will say, it's everyone's responsibility, of course, not just yours, but also the students' responsibility to, help cultivate a culture of positivity within the organization. And, hopefully there is that positive growth that is happening on the students' end, but also on your end as well, right? So you're also getting something out of this. And, we definitely thank you for your service. If you're a new advisor, you have been advising for several years now, definitely want to take some time to thank you for your service in helping our student organizations grow and our leaders as well. So in a sense, that is what, a student advisor is. They are an individual that will guide and support student leaders within an organization. However, what that looks like, I'll talk a little bit later on in the presentation because it will differ from organization to organization. And also I'll share some additional information at the end, but just to, start it off as well, who can serve as an advisor. This would be a faculty or staff member that is, of course, an employee of the university. Advisors must also be current, employees that are currently active. If you're a professor, you have office hours, you're currently engaged and active on campus. It is open to employees, faculty, staff, or administrators who hold those regular office hours on campus. Unfortunately, if you are on sabbatical, including, graduate students, like these individuals, unfortunately, wouldn't be eligible to serve as a club advisor. Oops. Okay. So what are some advising responsibilities, the responsibilities of an advisor? So as I mentioned previously, this is going to be a little different from club to club. We do, advise that when the student organization is being registered or it's in the early stages of taking shape on campus, that you meet with your student leaders to really talk about those expectations and those time commitments. Right? A lot of our clubs will have very different needs. Some organizations will probably want an advisor to be present at meetings and fully engaged with them, helping with certain discussions and decision making. Others may not require the advisor role to be so large, right? So it really is important that you all, if you haven't already, definitely take some time to meet with your student leaders and really talk about those expectations and those time commitments. That way you all are on the same page and have those expectations set. But some examples of some things that could come up in your roles, of course, are offering student leaders advice on planning events, programming, and just helping them make those decisions, as well as also connecting organization leaders to campus resources. So this is actually a really big one. So for example, for club registration, all clubs have to go through a re-registration process every academic year. So we start that process with the incoming president or the current president of your organization. So if the student, of course, has questions, or unfortunately the information wasn't passed down from the previous president to the incoming president, we do ask that you help guide the student to our office, whether it be just connecting them to myself, contacting student life and leadership. That way we can support the student in helping them complete the registration process, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Same thing with the students that may be experiencing some mental health challenges or issues, things are coming up in their lives. It's good to connect these students to, CAPS resources on campus. So just making those connections, right, is also a really important role and an example of what your role could look like as an advisor to your club. Another big one is mediating potential conflict within the organization. So you all, should have a role in just mediating that conflict, whether it be, dispute or conflict between one or more students within the organization. It is very important that you all are there to also support the students in having those meaningful conversations. Let's say also though, if it's a situation that you're not really super familiar with helping the students resolve, please contact our office. We are happy to also meet with you and consult and kind of brainstorm some solutions or next steps in order to help resolve that conflict within the organization. But just know that if a student leader is coming up to you and just requesting that assistance, please be there to also help mediate those conversations. And also reach out to us if we also need to be part of that conversation or in that room or in that space to, help have those conversations with students that are, bringing a little bit of conflict into the organization. And lastly, of course, if your schedules allow, right, whatever is discussed with your expectations with the student leaders, if you're able to attend those club meetings and events, that is also really recommended, just so that you are in the know of what the organization is doing, that you're kept in the loop. Always a good thing to engage with the organization as best as you can, as best as your schedule permits. So that would be another role for club advisors within an organization. All right, so let's talk about some university expectations, right? So these are the things that, are required for advisors to complete, such as trainings. The first one that I'll talk about is the advisor training, which, we ask our club advisors to complete this training every academic year, at least once a year, because information does tend to change and we update this information with the Titan Training Hub. So you are assigned this training through, your Titan Training Hub portal, just like you would any other, required training for university employees. It's accessed in a similar way. Also within the advisor training, a lot of what I'm talking about here will also be part of that training, but it goes a lot more, there's more information about it. It's a more thorough training. So yeah, it is a requirement, I should say, that club advisors also complete this training as being part of, the being part of or being an advisor to the organization. The second piece of training is SAGE training. So, organizations that are active on campus have the ability to have an ASI agency account, which acts as the organization's club bank account on campus. So before we are able to grant this access to our clubs, ASI Financial Services does require that the advisor and the club treasurer complete something called SAGE training, as well as also submit an ASI agency account form. And this essentially is a document where you're adding your signature, the signature of the president and the treasurer to give consent to open the agency account with ASI Financial Services. So it's those two things, right? It's the SAGE training and then the agency account that you'll work with your students to complete. But SAGE training is another required training, especially if your club wants to utilize their agency account to submit check requests for any out-of-pocket expenses that the students, had to make. They would get reimbursed through their club account. But before we can do any of that, then we do need to give you all access to SAGE. And then also just recognizing that you all are authorized signers for any financial club requests. So you're an authorized signer. And then it would be helpful as well to just, guide the student leaders in understanding our university policies and procedures. Ultimately, the responsibility is on the student to make sure that they are, following instructions and following university policy. But it really does help when, you're able to review those pieces of information with the student. And that way, of course, and if you all have questions, of course, you can reach out to our office about specific policy, and we're happy to also help interpret or have a conversation about it. But it is, of course, important that we, just review this information with our student leaders, as they're the main ones, managing the organization on campus. I also will talk about Clery Act and Campus Security Authority. So, if you didn't know, you all are mandated reporters. I'm also a mandated reporter as, being a university staff member on campus. So essentially, we are required to report any incidents of, Clery crime and any incidents of, discrimination, harassment, retaliation, sexual misconduct. These must be reported to risk management and then the Office for Civil Rights and Equity. So this is something that we further discuss in the advisor training we give you. And then there's also, I believe there's another separate Clery Act training that all of us, staff and faculty are required to complete throughout the year. I believe it's once a year. But this is another expectation, is that we do serve as mandated reporters. So if student leaders are sharing information with us, and we definitely need to be reporting those, incidents that may pop up. All right, so let's talk about managing the student organization. So I'll talk a little bit about registration, and then we'll dive into some other things. But this is actually a really important step that, unfortunately, oftentimes the students, like the current students, don't pass this information down to the incoming students. And a lot of the times, the organization doesn't come back because there wasn't a set transition for incoming members. And this information was also lost in the cracks, right? So club registration, so per Executive Order 1068, this is a CSU-wide campus policy that all the CSUs follow, which share information about, overseeing registered organizations on a CSU campus. Clubs and organizations are required to register with Student Life and Leadership, which is our office, in order to be recognized groups on campus. So the way that things work here at Cal State Fullerton is we offer two periods of registration. The re-registration process is open to organizations that were previously active. So all of the clubs that you oversee would be considered already active and would need to re-register next semester. So these are for clubs that are returning to campus, have already existed for, however long it may be, a couple of years, more than 5 years. And they would start the registration process with our office from May 1st through August 31st. So that's really the window that the student leaders have to work with our office to, have their organizations be active on campus. The second period of registration takes place from November 1st through January 31st. This is considered our new org registration period. So any students that want to start new clubs on campus would register during this time period. However, we did allow new clubs to also register over the summer, because we had quite a few of new clubs that were ready to go, had their members, had their advisor, had their club constitution. They were set to go. So they started the process over the summer and are now registered clubs. So I just want you to understand those two periods of registration, because there are situations where an organization that previously existed on campus doesn't meet the summer registration deadline, but they certainly can still register during the new org registration deadline, which is November 1st. So if some of your clubs are in that situation where they didn't get to finish registration, now is the perfect time to, work with our office to help them complete registration. And then the deadline for both of these, of course, is August 31st for re-registration and January 31st for new org registration. Also want to just share that, student organizations are student-led groups. And so the process should be initiated by the incoming president. Clubs also need at least 5 student members, a faculty staff advisor, and a club constitution, which our office, also can provide if they wish to refer to a sample constitution that we have. and they must also meet the requirements listed below. So the first requirement for club registration involves the incoming president submitting a club registration form and tight link. So they start that process with our office. They'll meet with me, and I'll, basically share information about the registration form, and of course gives me a chance to answer any questions that the student may also have in person or through a Zoom meeting. The second requirement is having the president and the treasurer attend LeadCon. So LeadCon is essentially a student leader training for presidents and treasurers that takes place every summer. It takes place in person, where we essentially rent out a lot of the TSU spaces. We have in-person workshops, and it happens 3 times during the summer. So both presidents and treasurers must attend LeadCon in order to fulfill part of that registration requirement. We currently also have a LeadCon makeup option. So it's an online, course of the training that takes place over the summer. If students didn't get to attend LeadCon or finish their registration over the summer, students would just need to complete the online LeadCon makeup course, and that would, basically give them credit for LeadCon attendance and meet that registration requirement. There are 2 additional trainings as well. So there's a president treasurers must also complete an alcohol education and hazing prevention course. So both of these courses are available online as well. If you all are currently advising an active organization, then a lot of the students would have already done these steps. But of course, this is information that we'll want to pass down to any incoming, presidents in the near future, because, time does go by very fast, and hopefully, right, we'll talk a little bit about transition later on in the presentation, but hopefully, the students are also starting to kind of think about recruitment for next year, and are hopefully also planning to participate at Discover Fest, which is happening in January, which is crazy to think how fast time is flying. But that is another opportunity that registered clubs have to recruit new members, at Discover Fest. So little sidebar there. And then the last requirement, of course, is for the president and treasurer to meet officer qualifications. So these qualifications consist of having a 2.0 GPA, being enrolled in courses, and of course, being in good standing with the university. So once these registration requirements are met, then the club is active on campus, and they're active for 1 year. So, and I said, like I mentioned, clubs will have to re-register every academic year. So every May 1st through August 31st. All right, so let's talk about some financial guidance as well that comes with, managing an organization on campus. So advisors are expected to support club leadership in managing the organization's finances, or I should say, working with the students to, manage those finances. So some of the things that could include is, maybe guiding the students with some information on just basic bookkeeping principles. So for example, creating a club budget. A lot of our clubs, unless if they're not part of an ICC, which I'll talk about in the next slide, a lot of the clubs that are not, tied to or affiliated with those interclub councils typically don't have a budget. We do, of course, advise a budget just as a way to keep track of those expenses. So those are some things that you may want to think about for your organization if the students are, have all these funds, but are not keeping track of the spending, right? And would be a very valuable lesson to work with the students on, and establishing that club budget, just, for their know-how of how this works, right? Another thing as well is, working with the students to be financially compliant with the following universities' administration of student organizations funds policy. So this specific policy, it's very similar to Executive Order 1068. It's a CSU-wide state policy for how, student organizations should manage their funds on campuses. For example, student organizations should, whenever they receive funding, whether it be from fundraising or other activities, those funds must be held in an ASI NC account on campus. Also, any funds that are generated from fundraising or other activities should go back directly to the organization. So I have actually linked this policy as well as several other policies that I briefly mentioned in these slides. So like I said, I'll share this information with everyone, and you're able to click through the resource link slide, and you can see this information as well on your end. But just just to bring that back up, this is the policy that the student organizations will need to follow in terms of how funds or administration works here on campus. And I briefly talked about the ASI agency account, but as I mentioned, that is another responsibility that the students will need to complete. So submitting that agency account form with updated signatures from the advisor, the president, and the treasurer will allow ASI Financial Services to activate the club's account. So, this form also needs to be submitted anytime there are changes to the positions. So let's say you submit the form with the students this semester. Let's say next semester the president is no longer in the position, so you have a new president that stepped into the role. We'll have to go ahead and resubmit the agency account form once more because ASI needs to have the current roster on file, right? So they need to know basically have the current roster. So anytime there are changes, work with the students and remind them to just submit that agency account form. That way they don't lose access to their account. And I mentioned SAGE training. So again, this is something that yourself and the treasurer would need to complete before you have access to SAGE. I also want to mention that the university follows a reimbursement model for student organizations. So purchases that are made out of pocket would need to take place. And then, if you have those funds in your club's account, then the students would get reimbursed through SAGE via check request. So, those are specific ASI financial service policies. That's something that they have shared with us, right? It's a reimbursement-based model for student organizations on this campus. All right, so financial guidance continues. So I just wanted to share a couple of some other options that student organizations have to generate some funding, because unfortunately, as much as we want to, we're not able to provide clubs with a starting budget. We have over 300 clubs, wish we could, but unfortunately, that's not something that is taking place right now within Student Life and Leadership. However, these are some options that student clubs have in order to generate some funding for their organizations. So of course, examples, fundraising. Clubs that are active on campus are able to fundraise on campus. They could also work with outside restaurants to establish a small percentage of funds generated from things that are sold, right? So that you could set up those type of fundraising opportunities with organizations. Clubs also have the ability to crowdfund and also create a giving page. And this is done through the Philanthropic Foundation on campus. So there's also those opportunities. Clubs also have opportunities to apply for ASI contingency funding. So these are funds that can be used to purchase, club supplies. They could also be used for programming, but the students would need to fill out an application with ASI. And then I believe they would then need to present their request to the ASI executive board and then go from there. But there is that opportunity as well for clubs to apply for contingency funds on campus. Excuse me. And then, of course, the joining an eligible interclub council. So if you don't know what interclub councils are, they're essentially umbrella organizations that can support other organizations that are part of, their umbrella. So they support organizations with funding for programming, could also be, table supplies. And this is currently the breakdown of ICC organizations that are active on campus. So there are 8 academic councils. There are 4 cultural councils. There is 1 sports club council, 1 community service council, 1 residential life, and then 4 fraternity and sorority councils. And then organizations, may be eligible to join some of these councils, but those are conversations that would need to be had with the students in those councils. Every ICC, I believe, has different membership, eligibility requirements that the students will need to meet. Oftentimes, from my understanding, the students will present their request to join the council. Like one of the clubs will present a request to join their council, and then the students would, this would be done at an ICC meeting, and the students would then, the ICC council would then vote on the organization's membership into this council. So that's, from what I understand, that's how that process works. But, if student orgs are granted access to their council, then they are able to have those other funding opportunities. So that's another way to, of course, have those funds for clubs to use. All right. And then space reservation. So our office oversees the reservation of outdoor spaces and classroom spaces. So student leaders are required to submit an event request in TitanLink. So if you're not familiar with TitanLink, it's essentially our club hub where organizations manage their club accounts. It's also a place where different types of events, meetings, a lot of student engagement happens within TitanLink. It is open to all the students, the faculty and staff members, who have CSUF credentials on campus. So it is open to everyone in the CSUF community. So it's essentially where also clubs manage their organization, create events, reserve spaces. So we do require that student leaders submit an event request in TitanLink. And we also ask that you help us in reminding the students to submit these requests early for any programming that the students want to do, because it can take 7 to 10 business days to process the event request. And that's just really because we get so many requests and we do need to approve those, to be fair, right? Approve them in the order in which we receive them. So it can take some time to get those requests approved. So again, just definitely would appreciate you just helping us remind the students that they need to submit these requests early for any programming they want to host or any spaces they want to reserve on campus. Also, the event request should be submitted by the club president, the event planner, or a student designee that may be the president designated to another position that's not listed on screen. I also want to mention that athletic spaces must be reserved through kinesiology and athletics, and that the TSU, so the Titan Student Union spaces, must be reserved through the University Conference Center. However, the process still starts with the TitanLink event request form. Once this is submitted, the form is forwarded to the appropriate areas on campus that will approve their own specific spaces. And as I mentioned, Student Life and Leadership specifically oversees approval for classroom and outdoor spaces. All right, so supporting club transition. So I briefly talked about this at the beginning of the presentation, but I think unfortunately, a lot of times, clubs don't return because there weren't other incoming members to fill those positions and, kind of carry the club's continuity into the following, semester or year. So a lot of our discussions with students during like re-registration workshops, we do focus on club transition and helping students understand the importance behind that. So I think, of course, it's also helpful that the advisor just remind the student about some of the club transition basics, right? So if your students haven't thought about, bringing in new members to hopefully, have a new board out of those members, maybe it's time to start those election planning conversations a little bit earlier. In my opinion, hosting elections to recruit or to have new members step into their role in May is a little late. It's also a really hectic time with finals. And I know all of you are also, if you're teaching, you're also preparing for finals and kind of the end of the semester. So what I would advise is, maybe having the students start to think about already spring elections and just figuring out a plan for electing new members, especially if a lot of your board is graduating this upcoming year. Starting those conversations early. And of course, making sure that the students are reviewing their constitutions and also following what is outlined there in regards to, hosting elections. So I wanted to just share that, advice. And then also working with the student leaders to develop a plan to organize and store club-related documents and procedures. So this could be done through a Google Drive folder. TitanLink also has a really neat feature called the Documents feature, where essentially it works like a Google Drive where students are able to upload files onto their TitanLink Club account, and they could also create folders. So that's a really great way for the information to be stored for the upcoming president or upcoming officers to review that information. So I think just really focusing on, again, starting those new member election conversations early in the semester will be helpful to provide a smooth transition. And of course, having a backup plan for students to just organize and store their files. Maybe they also provide you with copies of documents and procedures. That way, if unfortunately the president isn't able to pass this information along, you're definitely able to step in and share those resources with any incoming members. So yeah, transition is super important within an organization, and definitely the students will also, I believe they will also appreciate that extra little push that we give them, because they'll have a plan in place, and hopefully that smooth transition happens for that incoming board. All right. So how do I become an advisor? So as I mentioned before, if you all know of folks that, want to serve as advisors or are interested about the position, please feel free to direct them to me. I'm happy to also meet with them and discuss kind of the ins and outs of an advisor's role. And I know I mentioned these qualifications at the beginning of the presentation, but just as a little reminder, individuals should be full-time or part-time university employee on campus. They should also be folks that are able to hold office hours on campus. Unfortunately, individuals that are on sabbatical or graduate students, including graduate assistants, would not be eligible to serve as a club advisor. And then also, advisors should be aware that they are completing advisor training with our office, as well as SAGE training, especially if the club wants to utilize their ASI agency account. So I will also provide, like on the next slide, I believe there's a link a page of several different resources that are links that you can click on. I will be providing the advisor interest form, and that's filled out in tight link as well in these slides. So we are starting to, recruit more folks for the upcoming semester, as we have a couple of new organizations that are registering and may have some trouble finding an advisor. So if you know anyone that is interested, please share this information with them. I also do want to note, because I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, but I just want to note that faculty and staff advisors at CSUF serve in a volunteer capacity, and they are not compensated for this role. So this is a volunteer capacity, effort. Unfortunately, we're not able to compensate or provide that compensation. I would definitely refer to your specific, I want to say like your specific union contracts, if there is different language there, but these roles are all volunteer capacity only. I just wanted to make sure to also mention that. And then this slide here is what I promised I will be sending to all of you along with the recording. These are several links to different resources that I mentioned, such as the interest form, there's a club advisor role and responsibilities checklist. So this will actually be very beneficial in you starting that conversation with students about, establishing those expectations and those time commitment, conversations. I've also linked the ASI agency account form. The SAGE training is also linked. And then, of course, some SAGE instructions. If you have, trouble, once you have your login, if you have trouble kind of navigating through the page, there are some instructions here, but you can also reach out to me and I'd be happy to, meet with you and kind of walk you through that site. I've also included the ASI contingency funds application, the administration for student organization funds policy. There is a student organization transition guide that's specifically aimed for the student leaders, but you're welcome to take a look at that resource and see what we share with them to help support a smooth transition for incoming members. And of course, I've linked some other policies, Office for Civil Rights and Equity, student conduct, and then of course, I've linked our student life and leadership handbook, which has a lot of information or other policies pertaining to these items below. So yeah, I hope I'm giving you all the resources. And of course, if there's anything else you need from me, you're welcome to reach out to me. Again, my name's Jose, and I'm happy to help with anything that you all need. That, of course, club related things. Happy to help. And with that, I think that's the last slide. Yep, that is the last slide. I'll go ahead and pause to take some questions. I actually do see some in the chat, so let me refer to those real quick.